Greetings, creators. Welcome. Today we're continuing Encyclopedia Britannica 1910, continuing trusts. We stopped the last day on the industrial manager, so we're going to continue from there. When the person organizing the combination is himself an active businessman and has the intention of himself directing the affairs of the combination, another element besides that of personal profit very frequently enters into the problem. Most strong men like to take responsibility and to be dominant in affairs. When, owing to the advantages of combination that have been enumerated above, the prospect of a virtual monopoly seems certain, provided due skill in management is exercised. It is natural that the manager should wish to bring about the combination in order that he may himself have the satisfaction of being in substantially absolute control of the entire industry in a country, or possibly even in the world. The ambition thus to dominate in a great industry is akin to that of a statesman, and there can be little question that this pride of power and the desire to control the destinies of others has been a more or less conscious element in the formation of many of the most successful and most skillfully managed combinations. The form of combination which has ordinarily been first adopted has been some kind of agreement with reference to maintaining prices or to paying wages or to dividing the territory for the distribution of the product or similar questions. And we're now reading from the forms of combinations. The forms of combinations. Experience has shown that, generally speaking, such agreements are not likely to be kept in good faith for a long period. 2. In order to make the combination more permanent in its nature, the form of the trust, technically so called, was adopted. Under this form of combination, the stockholders of the various constituent companies of the trust place their stock in the hands of a small board of trustees, giving to these trustees an irrevocable power of attorney to vote the stock as they see fit and in accordance with specific instructions given at the beginning. The title to the stock itself remains in the original holder, with the right to sell or pledge or dispose of it as he sees fit, but without the power of recalling his right to vote. In return for this stock thus deposited with the trustees have ordinarily issued trust certificates, which are in themselves negotiable and take the place of the stock. Inasmuch as the holding of the voting power of the majority of the stock of each of the different constituent companies gave to the trustees absolute power of election of directors, and consequently the power of guiding harmoniously the affairs of all of the plant entering into the combination, regardless of the will of the stockholders, the United States courts held that the corporations entering into such an agreement had gone beyond their powers and that such a trust was illegal. So, owing chiefly to these hostile decisions of the courts, this form of trust was abandoned, and new forms which still, however, leave the power of unified direction in the hands of a few men were adopted. 3. So after the trust was declared illegal, it was usual when a combination was formed to organize a new corporation which bought all of the properties of the constituent members of the trust. These constituent companies then dissolved and the one great corporation owning all of the properties remained. 4. So the form that now seems to be much in favor approaches in its general nature more closely to that of the original trust. Under this form, a corporation is organized for the special purpose of buying and owning all or a controlling share of the stocks of each of the constituent companies. The separate companies are then managed technically independently. The dividends of the separate corporations are all paid to the parent corporation as the stockholder owning all of the stocks, and these dividends are the source of profits of the new corporation. The officers in this parent corporation, of course, vote the stocks of the separate companies and thus absolutely control. So now we're on to the trust and wages. From the savings which it is possible for the combinations to make, it would seem possible for them to pay higher rates of wages to those remaining in their employment than it was possible for the constituent companies to do. In certain instances, especially when the combination has first been made, wages have been increased. On the whole, however, it is probable that as yet the wage earners have succeeded in getting an increase of wages in circumstances substantially similar to those under which their wages would be increased by single corporations. An increase of wages comes only through pressure on their part. Under, under prosperous condition of industry, it is possible, without materially lowering profits, to increase the wages. Certain classes of employees, especially superintendents and commercial travelers, are less needed by the combinations, and consequently the total sum of wages paid to these classes by the combination is less than that formerly paid by the constituent companies. On the other hand, the number of employees of these classes being less than before, the average wage has in certain cases at least been increased. Owing to the fact that competitive selling is in certain cases largely done away with, it has in some, perhaps in many, cases been possible for fewer traveling salesmen of less skill and with lower wages to do the work than before the combination, so that not merely has the total expense been lessened, but also the average salary paid to those retained in the business. So in case of disputes arising between the combination and the operatives, the position of the combination is stronger than of an individual corporation. It is possible to close one or two works where troubles have arisen and to transfer orders to the other works without any material injury to the business, provided the closing of the one or two establishments is not for too long a period. Such instances have occurred. On the other hand, labor organizations are also rapidly increasing in strength, and their leaders are of the opinion that within a comparatively short time, they will be so thoroughly organized in an ally of the chief industries that a strike can be instituted and supported not merely in one or two establishments, but throughout the entire industry. Whenever this condition of affairs shall have been reached, the employees will be substantially on an equality with their employers in such cases of conflict, so that the advantage now resting with the combination will be largely removed. In certain industries, this condition seems already to have been reached. So now we're going on to prices. From the sources of savings that were enumerated before, it is evident that it would be possible for a combination either to increase the prices paid for raw materials or to lower the prices of its finished products. Experience, however, seems to show beyond question that whenever the combinations are powerful enough to secure a monopolistic control, it has usually been the policy to increase the prices above those which obtained during the period of competition preceding the formation of the combination. Inasmuch, however, as an attempt to increase prices to any great extent, so as to secure very high profits, would certainly result in tempting new capital into the field. It has been the general experience that prices have either been increased only comparatively little after the combination was formed, or else that competition entering the field has comparatively soon forced a lowering of prices to substantially the former competitive rates. It should be noted, however, that inasmuch as combinations have very frequently been formed only after a period of competition so fierce that practically all the competitors were running at a loss, it is hardly just to speak of a combination placing its prices above competitive rates unless one defines what is meant exactly by that expression. Whenever they have but whenever they have put their prices above the competitive rates existing just before the combination, it may mean that they have put their prices back to rates that will allow medium profits instead of losses, and not above rates that would be normal in the case of small competitors. All right, so now we're moving on to legislative remedies. So this part here talk is more or less elaborating on the trust when it was being adopted in America. All right, they started using it as combinations for monopolistic control of the industry, and due to the way it was structured, it was seen to be illegal by the courts. All right, so then they started to move more towards the proper structure of the trust. All right, so this is showing how the the trust it transitioned from the combination to the trust structure in America. So legislative remedies. So it will have been noted from what has been said that the excellencies or the excellences of the combination consist largely in the savings that have already been enumerated. The evils are: 1. The losses to investors through the acts of the promoters and financiers at the time of the organization of the combinations and through the speculation in the stocks which is at times carried on by the directors of the combinations themselves. 2. The losses to the wage earners from the power that sometimes exists of forcing wages rather than lowering sorry, rather, ra- sorry, Maria over that. The losses to the wage earners from the power that sometimes exists of forcing wages rather lower than it would be possible for a single corporation or manufacturer to do, and also from the discharge of certain classes of employees whose service are no longer needed, such as commercial travelers. It should be remarked of the latter case, however, that the injury is a personal one to those men that are discharged, but that it results in a saving to the community and therefore presumably to the wage earning class as a whole in the long run. A further injury at times to the consumer arises, as has been suggested, from the increase in price. Other evils come through the power that is sometimes exercised by combinations in the corruption of legislators, in the control over industries of such a nature that it tends to destroy the spirit of individual activity and independence on the part of many persons who would otherwise enter business independently. And evils also come through the increased force of any improper or dishonorable business practices. Since this added force of evil is given to any combination by virtue of its greater influence in the community, it is not intended to convey the impression that managers of combinations are less moral than other businessmen, but merely that whenever they are dishonorable in their practices, the influence reaches more widely. The chief remedies for these evils enumerated would seem to be more rigid laws with reference to the methods of incorporation and to the responsibility of directors to stockholders and to the public. This can perhaps best be brought about through greater publicity in both of these directions, probably under the inspection of government officials. The other line of remedies would seem to be the removal of special favors granted to these combinations, either by the government or by railways or other bodies so situated that they can distribute favors to the larger combinations. So now we're going on to the movement towards consolidation. The movement towards consolidation of industries in the United States began to be noticeable soon after the Civil War, 1816 1861 to 65, but it had not reached noteworthy proportions excepting in connection with the railways until within the last 20 years of the 19th century. During the latter years, many consolidations were made, the largest number during the years of 1898 to 1900. From what has been said earlier, it is evident that certain classes of industry, especially those that require the investment of fixed capital to large amounts, are especially adapted for combination. Very little tendency towards consolidation is found in the farming industry, and relatively speaking, little in industries that require the investment of but small capital. It is perhaps, however, not too much to say that in nearly all lines of industry, which from their nature are adapted for consolidation, combinations, more or less firm, have been made during the last few years. It is probable that as time passes, we shall have many of these combinations reorganized, and that in many lines of industry there will be further consolidation of present combinations. Experience has shown that when combinations are made in industries that from their nature do not seem well suited for consolidation, failure follows. In many individual instances, corporation lawyers who have had much practice in forming combinations advise their clients in lines of business especially fitted for competition not to enter a combination but to remain independent, assuring them that an individual is able to complete in such lines of industry sorry assuring them that an individual is able to compete in such lines of industry with any combination however large. Such advice, of course, would not be given were the industry one which was well adapted for consolidation. Great Britain. Now we are in the European experience. So that was the American. Now we are in the European. So Great Britain. The tendency towards consolidation has been for several years very noticeable in Great Britain, although the form has been rather that of a pool or ring than that of a trust or of a single large corporation. In the coal and mining industries, there have been agreements, and particularly in London and other distributing centers, these selling combinations have been able at times to control the market. This has also been true with reference to certain kinds of provisions, such as the bacon imported from Denmark. Of late years, there has been a marked tendency towards the formation of large corporations that buy up a very large proportion of competing manufacturing plants, and in this way secure at least a temporary monopoly on the market. The Salt Union was formed along these lines, but this has not proved successful, owing probably to the fact that new sources of supply were discovered. The dyeing industries in Bradford and in Yorkshire have been consolidated, so that in certain respects they have an absolute monopoly of the business, and in most directions of over 90% of it. The calico printers, the fine cotton spinners, the thread manufacturers, the bleachers, and others connected with the cotton manufacturing industry in Great Britain have nearly all been brought together into large corporations, which control from 90% upwards of the entire business. Similar combinations in cement, wallpaper, soap, tobacco, and other trades have been formed. Most of these large corporations have been in existence for such a short time that one cannot yet judge accurately regarding their permanent success. Many of them seem to have been overcapitalized and their dividends have not always met shareholders' anticipations. There has been no active popular movement against consolidation in England, and the government has passed no laws opposed to it. Parliament, however, has passed stringent amendments to the Companies Acts, changes enforcing publicity regarding the organization of all limited liability companies and their methods of management. The amended law is expected to prevent most of the abuses of combinations. So now we're in Germany. Germany seems to be peculiarly the home of combinations so far as Europe is concerned. In 1897, Liefman, writing regarding combinations in Germany, was able to mention combinations which were international in their scope in 41 different branches of industry. Of combinations that were confined to Germany alone, he mentioned 345, although many of them were in the same line of industry. For example, he found 80 combinations in different branches of the iron industry, 82 in the chemical industry, 38 in the textiles, and so on. Of that number, he thought that definite information could be secured, but he was of the opinion that very many more of less importance existed, and had excluded from his reckoning all of those that were purely local, as for example those among the breweries in the different cities as well as those among firms engaged merely in trade. The form of combination in Germany is ordinarily that merely of contracts among independent establishments, cartels with a C or cartels with a K, regulating the amount of output for each and in certain cases also the prices. As in Austria and in France, a central selling bureau of all the members of the combination is frequently found. The most successful combinations have been those among the coal miners in Western Germany and the 4 or 5 of the leading branches in iron manufacture, also in West Germany. Others of somewhat similar rank have been organized, one, for example, in the sugar industry, which includes both refiners and producers, and another among the manufacturers of spirits. The former, following that among the Austrian sugar manufacturers, is somewhat peculiar in that of the refiners guarantee to the producers of raw sugar a fixed price for their output so far as the sugar is intended for the home market, the refiners expecting to recoup themselves from the consumers through the monopolistic power which they possess. The law does not seem to be hostile to these combinations. Contracts that are immoral in their nature are, of course, non-enforceable. But the courts have, on the whole, not taken an attitude inimical to the larger combinations, and the government seems at times to have been inclined to favor them. In 1 or 2 cases where the government is itself a producer, as of soda, it is a member of a combination. Indeed, a Prussian minister in a speech in the Landtag has expressed himself favorably regarding the coal and iron combinations. The facts seem to show that the coal combination, at any rate, has used its power of fixing prices in a conservative way, and it has at times held prices somewhat lower than they probably would have been had free competition existed in that industry. So long as the combinations are managed conservatively, and so long as the government is able to secure a careful supervision over them, it is not to be expected that there will be much hostility in Germany on the part of the government. France. The number of combinations in France is probably much less than in Great Britain or Germany. In the Penal Code, there has been a provision for many years against monopoly brought about by unfair means, and in 1 or 2 rather prominent instances, there seem to have been convictions under this article. Consequently, the agreements that have been made, so far as they are intended to control prices, are usually kept secret. There have been, however, notably in the case of the iron industries, agreements made among the leading manufacturers under which the proportion of output assigned to each was fixed. A single selling bureau has also in such cases been established, which receives all orders and fixes the prices for all of the different establishments concerned. So far, this form of organization, although in certain localities it seems to have secured monopolistic power, has not been successfully attacked in the courts. For several years, it has been supposed that a similar agreement existed among the sugar refiners. They themselves, however, acknowledge only an agreement regarding the amount of the output which shall be assigned to each and deny any agreements to prices. Of course, an agreement regarding output would be likely to have a material effect upon prices. Somewhat similar combinations exist among the petroleum refiners, the porcelain makers, and some few others. The government has taken no active steps in the matter, but popular opinion seems to be awakening somewhat. So now we're in Austria. In Austria, the development of combinations has been very marked. The most successful combination on the whole, as well as one of the earliest, has been that of the iron industry. The sugar industry, however, including both refiners and producers of the raw sugar, and the petroleum industry are also combinations of great power. The form of these combinations is ordinarily that of an agreement regarding both output and prices. In some instances, a central selling bureau fixes the prices. In others, the market is divided, while in others still other forms of agreement of many kinds which serve to secure a monopoly are found. The movement has spread very rapidly indeed, until, in the opinion of many writers in Austria, practically all branches of industry in which agreements for the lessening of competition will prove advantageous are now largely controlled by combinations. The courts of Austria have, on the whole, shown themselves hostile to the movement. Contracts for the division of the market, for the assignment of fixed proportions of the entire output to different establishments, the fixing of prices, etc., are declared void and will not be enforced by the courts. This adverse action, however, does not seem to have affected very materially the tendency towards combinations, although it has perhaps tended somewhat to encourage the formation of large corporations, which should purchase all of the separate plants in any one industry. This tendency again is checked by the fact that the corporation law requires publicity in business, and that the taxes are heavier on corporations than on private firms, both as regards the legal rates and the certainty of collection. A government commission has recommended recognition of the combinations by law and their careful supervision and regulation by government authority. Right? JWG. And there's a bibliography of citations. Alright, guys, and we have reached the end of Encyclopedia Britannica's trusts and trustees. Right, we've reached the end where there's a few citations. You have C.W. Baker, Monopolies and the People, 1899. A. Berglund, The United States Steel Corporation, New York. G.L. Bolen, Plain Facts as to the Trust and the Tariff, New York, 1902. J.B. Clark, The Control of Trust, New York, 1901. The Problem of Monopoly, 1904. W.M. Collier, The Trust. What can we do with them? What can they do for us? 1900, W.W. Cook. The Corporation Problem, 1891, J.P. Davis. Corporations, a Study of the Origin and Development of Great Business Combinations, New York, 1905. We have E. Dollians. Paris, 1902. J.R. Dos Passos, Commercial Trust, New York, 1901. L. Duchesne, that's French. Paris. French, Berlin, Monopolies and Trust, New York, Corporations, right? I have a few citations here that was referenced, I guess. That was referenced. Yeah, this is the bibliography that was referenced to put together this read on Trust and Trustees in Encyclopedia Britannica. Alright, guys, so thank you guys for your time and patience. Remember, strengthening body, powers in mind. We're going to find another topic from the Encyclopedia Britannica, still continuing along the lines of trusts, estates, and we're gonna start another read very, very soon. All right, so look forward to that on the next video. All right, guys, stay up.